Shalom, this is Shira Sherbo, and welcome to Torah for the Nations. You know, I woke up this morning and looked at my phone, and I got such a sweet message telling me, Happy Mother's Day, Mom, and asking me, what do you want? I'd like to get you something that you really want. And I thought, that is just so sweet. It goes so much kind of with what I wanted to talk about today, about this idea of how when a person tells us what their choices are, it helps us to really know them. And, there's someone that I know, her birthday was coming, and her boyfriend asked her, what do you want for your birthday? And she said she had just moved, and her garage was full of all these heavy boxes. And she said, what I really want more than anything is help with these boxes to lift them and get out of the way. I can't walk through my garage. And on her birthday, he brought her some really nice cowboy boots, because he wanted them to go two-stepping. He wanted her to learn how to do two-step, and that was really nice. But it was like he was thinking about more what he wanted to buy for her, and she really wanted, we know this thing about our love language. You should know someone's love language. Does a person like jewelry? Would they really like to be taken out to dinner? And when you say to somebody, what do you want? And you really mean it, like, I want to do for you what you want. That's such a gift, because that's saying, I want to know who you are. I want to get to know you. And there's a story in 1 Samuel 16 where the prophet Samuel is told by God that I want you to go to Bethlehem, and I'm going to show you who I want to be the king of Israel. And so Samuel goes, and he knows that he's supposed to go to Jesse's house, and Jesse has 8 sons. And so each son comes out, and Samuel, the first son, is just tall and handsome, and Samuel's thinking, oh, it's got to be him. And the Lord ends up telling him, you're the prophet, you're the seer, but you don't see what I see, and he's saying that God sees the heart. And Samuel was looking more on the outside. And so he ended up seeing the first 7 of Jesse's sons, and God didn't choose any of them, and there was only one son left, and that was the youngest son, David, who was the shepherd out in the field. And God saw David's heart, because when David was watching his sheep, he wasn't the kind of shepherd that when a wolf came, he would leave and run for his life and save himself. He killed the bear, he killed the lion, and he protected his sheep. And so God saw David's heart. And so it's like, if you really want to know God and you really want to say to him, what do you want? I want to give you what you want. So he shows us many times that it might not be what we think, So Samuel was surprised that God chose David, but God told him, I see differently than the way man sees. So when we go all the way back to the story of Abraham and Isaac, and they had a relationship with God, not like the other people that lived during that time. One of the things that was very normal in the time of Abraham was people had gods that they served, but it wasn't like they had a personal relationship with these gods. They were always trying to get these gods to, make it rain or do something, and they would actually, like if a father had a wife and kids, he owned them. And it was normal, like if he wanted to take one of those kids and sacrifice that child to the gods, nobody said anything. There was no children's rights. There was no women's rights. It's like the father did what he saw fit. And so this was a normal practice. And the real God hated it. Abraham's God, this was so, he abhorred that they would think that these children were theirs to just offer up to these gods that didn't exist, only in their mind. And so God says to Abraham, I want you to go get Isaac, and I want you to come up to the mountain, And later when Abraham is telling this story, he says, we went up to the mountain to find out what God would choose. God was going to show us who he was. We were going to see. This is the mountain where we see who God chooses, what God chooses. We're going to find out, what does God want? And it wasn't, they showed, Isaac and Abraham both showed that, like, they were willing, like, God, whatever you ask for, we're ready to give you. Abraham said, Hineni. Hineni means, I'm here for you. What do you want? I'm here 100%. And it turns out that Abraham is ready to sacrifice Isaac, and God sends the angel and says, stop. No, that's not what I want. There's a ram caught in the thicket. That's what I choose. And so, looking back over this story, Abraham was like, God chose the ram. He didn't choose my son. And he showed, I hate human sacrifice. I don't want this. This doesn't please me. And it would be like, on Father's Day, if you go over to your father's house and you say, Dad, what do you want? Anything you want. You want a brand new car? What do you want? And your dad says, no, that's not what I want. There's some lamb chops in the fridge. Let's have a barbecue. That's what I want. I want to hang out with you. And so on the one hand, it's like the father knows, the son's very serious. Like, if you say, yes, I want a new car, he'll go get you a new car. He came over and he was seriously saying, what do you want? Whatever you want. And Abraham and Isaac were saying that to their God. And it was like these other people could never come back and say, well, we love our God so much that we sacrifice our children to the gods. It was like Abraham and Isaac were like, hey, we were there. We asked him. He could have said, that's what I want. But our God said, I want the ram, sacrifice the ram. And so, when Ruth and Naomi, this is Mother's Day, so I thought, okay, let me think about this relationship that we're talking about. One of Abraham's descendants is Naomi. And Naomi's grandparents were there at Mount Sinai. And so it was really at Mount Sinai that God revealed in a big way who he is, what he wants. He told them so many details about who he is, what he wants, how to do this, how to do that, how to build a society, how to bring world peace, how to be a blessing to other nations. And so when Naomi ended up outside of Israel, and she met Ruth. So in the Torah, we always see there's two groups of people. There's Israel and there's the nations. So we have Naomi, who's from Israel, and we have Ruth, who's from the nations. Now, Ruth has grown up with these other gods, these gods that sacrifice these people that sacrifice virgins to the gods. And this is what she grew up with, these gods that seem to require human blood. And now she meets Naomi from Israel, and they're mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. And she's learning from Naomi, and Naomi's talking to her about her God, this God of Abraham, and what he likes and what he chooses. And she's talking about the culture that they have in Israel is so different. Like the Israelites were taught at Mount Sinai, how do you treat foreigners? How do you treat the poor? Everything was about kindness and don't do to anyone else what you wouldn't want done to you. And in Moab just epitomized ungratefulness and unkindness. And so Ruth grew up in this one culture with these gods. And when she got to know Naomi, when Naomi was going to leave and go back to Israel, Ruth just clung to her. She was like, oh, you're not going without me. Like, Ruth was drawn to everything that Naomi was talking about, to about her God, and how her God was just the God of Abraham, the God that came down and met them at Mount Sinai, and the God that wanted a relationship with them. He said, tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And so Ruth was just clinging to her. She was just like, teach me everything. I want to know. And so when Naomi took Ruth back with her, Ruth did everything that Naomi told her. Like, here's how you dress. Like, we have modesty laws, and don't talk to the men. She just told her all the ins and outs of how to fit in to the Israelite culture, because she's coming from a whole different culture. And Ruth was humble, and Ruth did everything that Naomi told her to do. And it was a blessing for both of them. Naomi had such a hard life. Her husband had died. Her 2 sons had died. And it was like Ruth was saying, like, you need me and I need you. Naomi was just left alone, and this was her daughter-in-law. And Ruth was like, I'm young, I can work, I can take care of you, I want to go with you, don't go without me. And it was like, a win-win situation. Like, Naomi needed Ruth, and Ruth needed Naomi. And it's such an example, this story, of how it's supposed to work, with the Israel and with the nations. It's supposed to be a win-win situation. God starts with Israel, gives them the Torah, calls them his people, but then it's supposed to be this where it spreads out, where someone from the nations, if they have a choice, like Ruth, who gets to know Naomi. Now, there was another daughter-in-law, Orpah, and Orpah really liked Naomi also, and she was going to go with her also. And then in the end, she said, no, I'm going to stay. And it turned out that Orpah just went back to her gods and her culture, and she became the grandmother of Goliath. And Ruth became the great-grandmother of King David. And you know the story of David and Goliath. And so it was like this, Orpah was the antithesis of Ruth. Whatever Ruth did to benefit Israel and to benefit her life, Orpah was the exact opposite. So she had the opportunity to also cling to Naomi and go with Naomi and learn about Naomi's God and Abraham's God, but she stayed in Moab with her own culture and her own gods and their ways. And Ruth said, your God is my God, your people are my people. And it ended up to be good for Israel and good for Ruth and good for the whole world, because King David and the Messiah comes through Ruth. So I know one of the things that changed my life was when I started the stories that I had grown up with, I started to see them from a Jewish perspective, see them with new eyes, see them from the Torah perspective. And it's absolutely life-changing. The Torah is so deep. It can be read like a 5-year-old can understand it, or you can go deeper and deeper and deeper and glean so much from it. And that's what I really like to do. And I like to learn these things. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to teach, because the teacher always learns the most. And I learn so many things. I'm going to do a few more teachings on the book of Ruth. And I have been learning so much. And I want to tell you these stories, and I want you to hear them in a way that you've never heard them before. Kind of learn things like you're learning it for the first time. That's the way to learn it. Just kind of empty yourself out and hear things like you're hearing it for the first time. All right, so the goal here at Torah for the Nations is just to connect people to Abraham's God, the God of the Torah, to Moses' God, the God of Israel, and to know what choices he made, to know who he is by his choices. And he didn't choose human blood sacrifice. He chose the ram, and that's really important to know. All right, all you mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. And we'll see you next time. Shalom from Israel.